Darwin came along, he raised questions for a lot of Christians as to whether we can ever again reconcile the Darwinian picture of life with the traditional doctrine of divine providence, a God who provides, a God who cares for the universe. And the reason that question came up was if you look at the Darwinian recipe for life, it has three features, or three ingredients, if you will, that seem to be, at least at first, unpromising as far as whether we can ever believe in a providential God again. And those three ingredients were, first, accidents; second, natural selection; and third, the enormity of time, deep time as cosmologists call it. So many people who are familiar with the Darwinian picture of life, with the evolutionary biological picture of life today, as right after the time of the publication of The Origin of Species, so the question is still very much the same, wonder, how do you reconcile providence with this ragged picture of life that unfolds in the Darwinian fashion? Well, let me respond to each of those very briefly. First of all, what I would like to ask people is, try to imagine a world without accidents, without contingency. Such a world, if you think about it, would be so dead, so lifeless, so stiff, that there would be no room for anything new ever to happen. Everything would be determined. The spontaneity that we find in the contingency of evolution is such that it can be interpreted as the world opening itself for a future. And in that sense, reconcilable with the idea of a God who cares so much for the world that this God wants the world to become independent in its struggle. This God does not force or coerce the world into some necessities, to some pattern that's been, or blueprint that's been designed from all eternity, but allows the universe to unfold at its own pace. And that's why it would take lots and lots of time, perhaps. There's no reason why we can't reconcile the idea of divine providence with deep time, with the patience of someone who really cares that the world be given every opportunity to become itself. And then there's a second ingredient, which I can talk about finally, that of natural selection, which we can call one of the habits or one of the constants of nature. Very reliable, very predictable, and sometimes it would seem relentlessly impersonal. But again, try to imagine a world without regular, predictable laws, like the law of gravity, or if you want to call it the law of natural selection. Such a world without lawfulness, would be so capricious, would be so spineless, it would collapse into jelly at every present moment. So you need a lawfulness in order for the world to have enough of a backbone or consistency for it to even have a future as well. Now, as I look at those three ingredients, contingency, necessity, the law of natural selection, and deep time, what I see there is an exquisite blend of factors which make the universe a story. This is the miracle that emerges from those three ingredients. In fact, Darwinian evolution is unintelligible without a universe that has that mixture of contingency, law, and time. The question is, how does God create with respect to evolution? And I would say that the best way of putting it is to say that God creates from out of the future, from up ahead, rather than from the past. We normally, when we think of the creation of the universe, we think of some opening act of explosion that is triggered by God. But another way of thinking, perhaps a deeper way of thinking about God, and a more biblical way of thinking about creativity, God's creativity, is to think of God in the prophetic way. The God of Abraham as a God who opens up a new possibility to Abraham and his family. Let's just apply that to the whole universe. The God of evolution is the God who opens up the future for the universe, giving it from out of the blue possibilities for becoming new, for becoming surprisingly new, that could not have been anticipated simply on the basis of the analysis of the past. I think what you have to see here is a universe which is gradually being awakened to consciousness. Before humans came along, there were other kinds of less intense kind of sentience and consciousness. And in a sense, consciousness has been a vein of reality from the very beginning. I mean, we live in a universe which, as we now know from astrophysics, was set up from the very first moment so as to eventually give rise to life and consciousness. And consciousness flowers and blossoms in very interesting ways, even prior to the emergence of humans. What makes humans distinct is that in us, evolution finally becomes conscious of itself. So we are evolution conscious of itself. And why that's so interesting is that if that's the case, then in a way the universe is in our hands. The future of the universe is one that depends in part upon what we do with our lives together on this planet and perhaps eventually in the universe at large. I think what we have to do in the light of evolution is actually elevate and ennoble ourselves even more than before. Because what we've learned about the natural world and our interaction with it is that to be in nature is to be related, to cultivate relationships. And that in many ways is the meaning of freedom. Freedom is the capacity for relationality. And we have in nature a whole hierarchy of different levels of relationality. For example, we have at the level of rocks, let's say, a rock is minimally related to its environment, but a plant, which puts down its roots into the soil, has a richer relationship to its environment. When you get to animals, you have the capacity of these organic beings to roam around and form ever more complex ecological relationships with their environment. When you get to humans, you get a being who is capable of relating to not only his fellow humans, but to the universe, to the ecosystems, to enemies as well as those that we love. And the whole point of the biblical understanding is for us to not to isolate ourselves from the rest of reality, from our fellows, from other creatures, but to accept ourselves as part of an earth community. And then finally, God would be the most relational of all beings. In fact, we can say that the absoluteness of God consists of God's being absolutely related to everything. So if we understand ourselves as being in the image of God, then that image of God should be our capacity for relationship. Well, I think you have a very interesting God, perhaps more interesting than ever in the history of theology. You have a God also who is very biblical, and by that I mean a God who opens up the future. The biblical literature, if you look at it, almost every page is filled with a kind of exhortation to open ourselves to surprise. And the God of Israel is the God who liberates, the God who surprises. And I think this God fits evolution quite nicely, primarily because evolution, if you look at it simply from a natural point of view, is a process of the world seeking out different arrangements, different kinds of existence, including eventually life and mind. And as we think about God in relationship to the universe today, we should think about God as perhaps offering possibilities for new kinds of evolution in the future. So how do you reconcile God's power with freedom is of a piece with the larger question in science and religion. How do you reconcile the idea of divine power with the evolutionary character of life? And I think from a theological point of view, the answer is rather clear, but startling and surprising, and not something that philosophers would ever have thought about, but it's at the heart, I think, of Christian revelation. And that's the theme of the divine descent, the divine self-humbling. What we have in Christianity is a picture of infinite love, so longing for otherness that it restrains itself withdraws itself, to use an imperfect expression, so as to allow something other than God to come into that space that's opened up by the divine self-humbling. And that otherness we call the world. So creation itself is not so much an act of divine pyrotechnics as it is the omnipotent, omnipresent, all-powerful God in the power of love allowing something other to come into existence. The question is whether this evolutionary vision of things isn't perhaps a bit scary for us as individuals. And I think that's probably true. We do fear, in many ways, our becoming great. We do fear, more than perhaps anything else, the actualizing of our potential. I think this is true of all of us in some way. But you have this basic principle in theology that St. Irenaeus formulated many years ago, and that's that the coming of humans to maturity is the glory of God. The glory of God is the perfecting of humanity. Or man, as it's usually translated. Let's just apply that principle, that the glory of God is that this whole universe flourish and become expansive and give way, give a place to creativity, to love, to joy, to peace, to human achievements, to human creativity. That's the glory of God. That's what God wills, not the diminution of ourselves, not cowering behind obstacles that seem too great for us, but in the face of these obstacles, accept them as challenges, because that's the way evolution has always worked. I mean, try to imagine a universe in which there were no challenges. Life would never have improved beyond the amoeboid state. How anemic of character we humans would be if we never had to face challenges, the challenges of becoming more, the challenges of participating in this cosmic process of becoming more. This is the world that we're given. Is it the best of all possible worlds? I don't know. But it's the world we have. And it's the world in which great achievements, but also great failures are possible. We have to choose.